Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Intuitus's webinar focusing on the manufacturing sector today, and specifically the subject of how to capitalize on opportunities in the manufacturing sector in the new normal, i.e. in the world that we find ourselves now under COVID-19. You have here at the moment myself, Adrian Astley-Jones. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer in Intuitus. And in a few moments, I will introduce our panel. Before I do that, I just quickly want to cover a number of housekeeping issues, just as formalities. Firstly, we are recording the webinar, and we will share this later. And also, we like these to be interactive. There is a questions facility in the webinar technology that you should all have access to. Please ask questions either as we go along or at the end. We're more than happy to answer them as we go along, or whenever you feel you want to ask a question. So that's the housekeeping. In terms of introduction, so I'd like to welcome to our panel today two of our consultants. We have Phil Reynolds. Phil is a seasoned IT director, senior technology leader, and interim managing director. Many years in the manufacturing sector and supply chain industries as well, and has held former board level senior technology roles at organizations like Philips Electronics, EC Harris, and DS Limited. And the second panel member we have is Denis Connolly. Again, Denis is a experienced CIO, board level technology operator, specifically in the manufacturing sector, both across healthcare manufacturing and a number of different areas in supply chain environments. So I'd like to welcome them to the panel and thank you for their time, and thank you everybody else who's dialed in. In terms of our agenda today, we would like to cover three key areas really. First one, how manufacturing has already transformed to deal with unprecedented situations. Secondly, what the long-term effect of COVID-19 could be for supply chains, people, processes, and markets. And thirdly, how this could affect your business. And perhaps as a leading question or scene setter before we get into those three areas, and that is really the current impact. What is it we're actually seeing out there in the manufacturing sector at the moment? And I'm going to hand over to Denis in a short while just to give us a bit of background on that. But of course, part of the answer will be, or question actually, will be across the manufacturing sector, are we seeing, and invariably the answer probably is yes, to a greater or lesser degree, are we seeing different challenges in different sectors of manufacturing, and even within the same sectors, different challenges for different companies. So for example, if you're a healthcare manufacturer, arguably your challenges could be actually meeting demand, as well as fixing supply chain and getting access to resource and labor. Whereas conversely, clearly, if you're a manufacturer in, shall we say, supplying a consumer-based business at the moment or a retail-based business, perhaps your challenges are a completely different set of challenges, such as mothballing, production, so on and so forth. So with that in mind, Denis, I'd like to ask you maybe just to kick off and set some scenes around the current sort of situation and sort of the top level impacts before we get into those three questions.
Thanks very much, Adrian. Yeah, I mean, it certainly is a very interesting time in manufacturing. Obviously, my current firm, supplies and does distribution and value-added services for top 10 of the top 10 in pharmaceutical and healthcare. So yeah, I mean, we've certainly seen lots of different very interesting challenges. I suppose the first thing I'd say, Adrian, is that we have often seen these type of changes in manufacturing during previous crises, and I think it's very important that we see COVID and certainly at a board level, we currently see board level, we see COVID in very much in that historical context, because again, previous crises have happened in the past, the Great Depression, or obviously World War II, 9/11, the 2008 financial crash, and those crises have brought about lots of changes in the manufacturing and general supply chain space. Obviously the rise of the military-industrial complex during World War II, 9/11, really exacerbated the 2001 recession, and also that whole global security move from a manufacturing perspective. Lots of critical national infrastructure at that point came under a lot of scrutiny. 2008, obviously, we saw a big shift in manufacturing to and in supply chain to the experience economy, and the reliance on a lot more reliance on offshore production capability and obviously in Asia. So it's again, we liked in our company and in our clients to see COVID in that whole space and historical context, which I think gives us a very good context for where we already are. Again, this is an unprecedented situation, but there have been other times in the recent past where manufacturing and supply chain have gone through lots of different changes and challenges. So we view this as one of those challenges, and how we respond to it is very much in that context. Again, we certainly see in our business, in the healthcare business, rather than a decline in demand, we see the opposite challenge, which is more of a constraint on supply. So again, lots of our manufacturing plants and lots of our customers' manufacturing plants and distribution organizations are constrained or shut down. However, demand is very significantly up across all geographies, all sectors, all types of products. So again, COVID is obviously hitting different areas in manufacturing at a different pace. Obviously we do also do some work for other companies in industrial equipment, and we see declines in that particular area. So again, lots of different challenges. Obviously, elective surgeries, have been cancelled in lots of different geographies, and we see that impact in our industry. But also, we do see, a continuing spike in demand for other products, even, unexpected products. And, again, that's in our industry, but it's in lots of other different industries. I recently attended a session where, there was a discussion about printer toners. Again, you would think printer toners will be a manufacturing industry that will be stressed, under challenge, going down in terms of market demand. In fact, it's doubled since 2015. So, again, people are printing more information, and again, sometimes it's counterintuitive what the impact of COVID is to manufacturing at any particular moment in time.
Okay, Denis, thank you for that. Phil, do you have a view on, sort of what I would call general impacts across the manufacturing sector? I mean, I know Denis has mentioned a few there in terms of perhaps the obvious ones of supply chain restrictions and, workforce restrictions, but is there anything else you're seeing in the sector which is, perhaps generic to all industries within the manufacturing bracket?
Yeah, good afternoon, Denis and Adrian and the attendees on the webinar. Just to emphasize what's already been said, there's a shift in customer demand, both within the supply chain and end consumers. And as has been said, some areas have been actually quite positive. If you're in pharmaceuticals, paper, personal care, PPE and medical equipment, early on, tinned and frozen food. Yeah, it's been many consumer goods areas obviously have been suffering, construction materials, fuel and energy. And of course the impact then across the entire supply chain of being able to fulfill, even in areas where there have been increases in demand, that doesn't mean there's been the capability to supply, with constraints on logistics capabilities and sourcing throughout the entire supply chain. This is in addition to the other challenges that manufacturing have, and challenges to transform around health and safety, providing PPE equipment, ensuring appropriate distancing, at least short term, potentially going into the longer term, labour shortages through illness, through difficulty or inability to travel by public transport. And another area, which I think we'll touch on as we go into things in more detail, government intervention, with diktats coming in short timeframes that affect what manufacturing can do and affect the supply chain in terms of what goods can and cannot travel, how people can do business, how people do or do not get to work. So around travel and what even is essential work. So there's a constant this isn't just what are the impacts and the challenges of COVID-19, but how are they actually changing day by day, and how are manufacturers actually responding to that on the ground now?
Okay, that's a good segue into the first question, I guess, Phil, which is, what is manufacturing doing, and what have we seen already that's transformed to deal with these unprecedented situations? So, you have supply chain constraints, you have people constraints, and a magnitude of other things. What have we seen, and what are people doing? And actually, also aligned to that, has technology, or is technology playing a point? And I guess a further question is, are we seeing these businesses completely pivot, or are they just enhancing elements of their existing business processes, or are they seeing this, as I say, as an opportunity to pivot for maybe the long term and capture new fundamental opportunities that might be coming as part of the new world?
I'll take that first before handing over to Denis. I'd say, well, as we said at the beginning, each business is in a different market with different challenges and a different position in terms of its ability to respond. What I see as being typical in terms of response is it had to be very flexible and very rapid to address the challenges that at a high level we've outlined so far, and to reduce the impacts, whether that's actually meeting increased demand, or perhaps more commonly in slowing down or shutting down, and how do you manage that? Denis introduced a number of crises in the past. I lived through the semiconductor downturn of the early 2000s when I was the globally business director, and it was a matter of surviving, slashing as many jobs as possible, reducing costs, and it was a desperate state. And there will be manufacturing businesses who are in a similar situation now, at the same time as others are unable to actually exploit the opportunities that are coming. So we've seen an emphasis on rapid response, as I said, and trying to reduce the impact positively and negatively, repurpose the capabilities, some of the more public ones being around PPE and ventilators, and the big boom, as we all, quite a number of us on this call will be doing now, home working and webinars and video conferencing, a move from online ordering and direct delivery. There's a number of manufacturers, Logitech being an example I know of, who are supplying their goods online direct and not through distributors. Fat chance of getting their products through distributors at the moment, but you can go direct. So they're thinking about, well, how do we actually meet the market demands? Now, whether they'll continue with that and looking at alternative sourcing, we're seeing scanning the markets for where do you get materials from, what alternative suppliers are, what alternative locations there are. So although I don't think there is one set of actions that are addressing the challenges, but the common themes they've got are being very flexible and being very rapid. It's almost like thinking on your feet in terms of contingency planning, where you don't know what's coming next. So it's exciting times at the same time. Sorry, Adrian.
No. So I think what you're saying, Phil, is a key point. Is, and this might be stating the obvious, is having management teams which are capable and confident of making rapid, quick decisions. So they have the governance structure to do that, and they have the experience and skill to do that, and to a certain extent the courage to do it. Obviously based on risk profiling and so on and so forth. So the speed of movement is critical. And I think the other interesting thing there, Phil, is if you're saying that there are manufacturers which may or might not take the opportunity to fundamentally, what would be described as changing elements of their business, or i.e. Logitech going direct to the consumer, cutting out distribution, then that is clearly a significant change around business model, business process. And that, I think, would be a very interesting point of view across all industries in the manufacturing space. I don't know, Denis, if that's something that you would find familiar or would ring true with you.
Yeah, absolutely, Adrian. I mean, I think it's a fascinating space at the moment. And again, I think your point about agility is key. Being agile and quickly responding to the changing circumstances. And we do see this actually, even in a relatively conservative industry like pharmaceuticals, biotech, medical device, we actually have seen where that shut-in economy, where people are obliged to spend more time at home or want to spend more time at home, and want to do more of their processing and ordering online. We're even seeing in these very a relatively conservative industry, with lots of regulatory thresholds, where online ordering of product is happening, exponentially happening in some circumstances. Now, again, obviously, certain parts of our industry are highly regulated and isn't available for online shopping, but there is certainly lots of parts of the industry and various parts of diagnostics, various parts of animal health, various parts of hygiene products and nutritional products, where an online an online facility, an online portal are being developed by a whole swathe of different people, suppliers, 3PLs, distributors, wholesalers, are all actually getting into that direct-to-patient model, where home deliveries are literally rising at a rate of 40 to 50%, even in these traditional industries, conservative industries. And obviously certain parts of the industries probably will never be in a position to have that direct to patient, cutting out pharmacies and cutting out GPs and cutting out hospitals, but certain parts are certainly large parts of the industry now are looking at that direct model, and a whole swathe of different direct to patient supply chains, where manufacturers are sometimes using 3PLs and 4PLs, and sometimes directly shipping products from manufacturing facilities to customers. And again, sometimes that's small quantities, sometimes that's large quantities. So we're seeing that even in a conservative industry like pharmaceuticals, we're bound to see that in lots of other manufacturing industries that are less governed by regulation as well.
And how do you think that's manifesting, or what you see in the market? Do you feel management teams are ready for this and aware of this? And the reason I asked the question, Denis, is some of our other evidence, and we're soon to be doing a webinar on the retail sector, and parts of that might be relevant to this conversation in terms of, especially in the grocery sector. So it's more supply chain clearly than pure manufacturing. But tier 2 grocers are crying out around, how do I access my customers, and how do I do that online? Purely, so if you take an example of the co-op, for example, which again is slightly more clearly in supply chain, you can't order food online with the co-op. So there are lots and lots of management teams in those businesses, in the tier 2 grocers, who are asking one question, and the question they're asking is, how can you help me by a factor of 10 speed up the digitalization of my business? So it's not necessarily transforming the business from a disintermediation point of view, but it's literally transforming some of the channels. Is that something that is applicable to the digitalization piece and the use of technology in the manufacturing sector, whether it's use of data, whether it's robotics, AI, digitalization through those processes and those technologies?
Yeah, it's a fascinating subject, Adrian. Certainly when we compare, pharmaceuticals, healthcare, biotech to retail, I would say, we're coming from a slower starting position, without a doubt. So, most retailers, not all, of course, some very notable exceptions in retail, have no, digital presence or online presence or direct to consumer presence or optimized supply chain presence. They've got very rigid supply chains. Certainly, but most retailers, to be fair, have at least that presence and have had that presence for a number of years, as that trend has been gradually evolving in retail. What I think we're really fascinated by in our manufacturing industry is that even though we're coming from a much slower and slower rate of digitalization, slower rate of that supply chain disruption, it's really accelerated. So into the case where a large number of firms, large multinational firms, are either developing these capabilities themselves quickly, have already developed them and have them live, or are using intermediates and third parties to do so. So, even though, our industry has been quite a slow adopter of that e-commerce capability for traditional reasons and regulatory reasons. It's a lot of cases now where it is actually happening on healthcare products, on nutritional products, and diagnostic products, on products that don't require a prescription, where that online presence is building very, very quickly. And to your point, or to your point earlier on, it's about that rapid decision making at a board level or at a management level, where they can see these trends, these spectacular drops and changes in demand, and acceleration in demand, and making sure that they've got the online capability to flex that demand and to quickly adjust their supply. We're seeing at both ends, Adrian, where the demand is obviously coming in now a lot more from that shut-in economy and from remote workers and from people at home, and then obviously from a supply perspective, and again directly impacting upon manufacturing, lots of restrictions in different countries, and needing to quickly flex. And I suppose what we're really seeing above all else is the ability to have that view of your demand and of your supply at a manufacturing level, ideally at a holistic manufacturing level, where you can very quickly see how much inventory you've got, how much demand you've got coming in, either online demand or traditional demand coming in from wholesalers, suppliers, distributors, and being able to amalgamate those demand and supply visions and move quickly. So we're seeing those companies and our partners who have that traditional S&OP or demand supply planning capability being the real winners here, because they're quickly flexing on both demand and quickly flexing on supply, and doing it on a global basis as things flex and change. Lockdowns are obviously changing on a daily basis in lots of different countries, and restrictions are opening and closing. To have that overall overarching view in a demand supply type environment is a real differentiator now, and that having that digital that digital tool set, whether that's someone like FutureMaster or Kinaxis or SAP APO or any of the technologies that are there that can holistically see your demand and your supply coming in, it's having a major impact on that flexibility in the supply chain, and obviously in manufacturing.
Okay, I mean, this sort of moves us slightly towards our second question anyway, which is what are the long-term effects of COVID-19 could be for the supply chains, people, process, and markets. And I think maybe, Phil, it's maybe a good time for you to come in on that one, which is, I give some context here, which is a little bit broader than perhaps our current subject, but I was listening to another webinar where a very well-known, whose name I can't recall actually, having said that, scientist stroke professor in the manufacturing supply chain space was making the comment in the UK that we've all shifted over the years our supply chain base to China, a lot of it, and actually what that's meant is we've lost control of that, and what we should have been doing, in his argument, was investing more in the traditional heartlands of manufacturing in the UK so that we've got more control over our our supply chain and so on and so forth. And is that sort of a view of the future? And of course, the argument against that would be, well, there's a price issue, and we've been so focused on the price issue that we've been not really understanding some of the fuller issues, my challenges as things like this come down the line of us. So I think, Phil, it'd be interesting to see your view on the long-term effects, what supply chain effects, people, process, markets. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. Well, just to finish off where Denis was, we've sort of touched on the immediate response, which, if it's good, is rapid, agile, reimagining how businesses and manufacturers can deal with the challenges that they're presented with now, which are ever changing. So now we're moving to looking a little further ahead, and again, I think there's almost two scenarios, but it's a path which manufacturing businesses are going to go down. There's the next year, 2 years, 3 years, when we'll still be being impacted by COVID-19. It is highly likely that different parts of the world are going to be impacted for a considerable length of time. Fears of a second and third wave, which, if historical context is anything to go by, could even be worse than this one. So there's the planning for what's the new normal in terms of living with COVID-19, and then, well, what's the eventual outcome going to be? So when this is finished, how do we provide resilience against further pandemics or similar disruptions to the supply chain and to manufacturing? So the challenges, as I see them, are around currently and continuing for some time, certain scarcities, difficulty shipping, potentially price rises, and a need to reduce reliance and improve resilience. Now that could mean looking at where raw materials are coming from in terms of broader geographies, and where, so not just the supply side, but where customers potentially could be, which I know is the opposite of the local for local. But for some businesses, that could well be being more diverse in terms of where materials and who you supply from in different parts of the world, which may be affected differently, is important to look at, as are where the customers are, and also the change in customer demand. Production resilience, I think, needs to be specifically looked at, not just within your own supply chain, but also within your own environment in terms of you'd be potentially using component manufacturers. I think sustainability, as we look long term, is something that's going to be coming to the fore again. I don't believe that issues such as pollution and the environment and waste, all we're doing is adding an even potentially another very serious one in terms of how do we be less vulnerable to a pandemic. And then again, the government changing requirements that on one hand, as Denis was saying, could be legislation locally to ensure supply, which might drive more local manufacturers. There'll be legislation probably around continuing around waste, the environment, health and safety, which again will cause challenges. So going back to the questions, the long-term effect, I think, will be looking at resilience in the supply chain, both main and secondary suppliers, potentially ensuring that you understand, in fact, your customers understand your resilience. I can imagine resilience audits or whatever they're called coming in, where you're interested in, well, how are you going to cope with this? How are you going to ensure you can supply to us? And your customers doing the same to you. How reliable are you going to be if similar events occur in the future? Looking internally at your operations, your physical production capabilities, what new product lines, how are you going to organize processes? So you've got things like social distancing, there are fewer people on site. How is demand changing? We already know demand is changing, the way consumers create that demand or expect it to be fulfilled. Therefore, your product mix is going to change. You need to assess your resources. They're going to be impacted. What people do you need to do what? What facilities do you need? What new processes do you need to meet these challenges? What capital have you got? And what can you repurpose? So I think this is it's almost a continuum from currently the focus is on maximizing the best from a very challenging situation in terms of being rapid and agile. There's going to be a period, well, how are we going to cope having to live with this long term, even when manufacturing gets back to a reasonable level? It will be different. And then there's the end game as to what can we invest in to actually reduce the impact in the future. And I think there's a lot more we can talk about, but I'll leave that just as an introduction for now.
Thank you, Phil. And Denis, do you want to add to that in terms of the long-term effect on supply chains, people, process markets? What's your view on that? Is it similar to Phil's, or do you think there's a different view out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of Phil's points are great points, right? I mean, I think just going through a couple of different things on this, Adrian. We're fascinated to see, the revival of domestic manufacturing in our industry, and already. So, again, 50% plus of manufacturing facilities and API facilities in North America, Western Europe and in Australasia were mothballed over the last decade. With pricing pressures and offshoring, we're seeing a significant revival of some of those domestic plants. There's actually a roaring trade in manufacturing plants that were previously mothballed being brought back to life, and in different, what could be perceived as being high cost North American, Western European, Australasian facilities. So, we're already seeing that. Some of that, obviously plays very well from a governmental perspective, but even direct, the manufacturing companies themselves in our space are seeing that, there's an over-dependence of certain, and again, these plants are, extremely slow to start, having to go through regulatory approvals and startup approvals. So these are long-term decisions that are made, and long-term decisions to wind them down as well, right? So, but it is interesting to see that revival of domestic manufacturing already being started, talked about, and actively being planned, to the point where old plants are being brought back off the shelf. Certainly those plants that are viable, have a high level of automation. I suppose again, another key perspective in our industry, Adrian, is we're seeing a lot more interest in industrial IoT and tools like sensors and data visualization, remote monitoring tools, and AI-based insights across manufacturing and supply chain. So again, giving that control tower view of what's exactly happening across the whole manufacturing operation. So that's allowing people to quickly adjust demand and supply. And again, I think there's such a push now on demand and supply, and having those insights across all the key indicators. So really we're seeing that differentiation, Adrian, happening amongst manufacturers in right across our industries that have got that, those manufacturers who've got that digitalization journey, and those that are much further along in that digitalization journey. A prime example, Adrian, that that we're seeing all the time now is manufacturing automation. So those changes in automation and robotics in our industry, and obviously in many different industries, are dramatically increasing productivity across a whole range of manufacturing processes. And obviously the big advantage of those in a post-COVID manufacturing world is that they can be relatively easily, that high automation, high levels of robotics can be relatively easily reshored. And we're also seeing trends in the marketplace and in the industry where automation, robotics, automated lines are being moved into different locations, sometimes surprising locations, and that creates obviously new manufacturing jobs, and new manufacturing opportunities, for those more digital savvy employees and service industries. So we're certainly seeing where that automation, robotics, automated lines are being moved from different locations. Some manufacturers are taking a very aggressive view of that, and quite significantly altering their manufacturing automation and where they are moving automation to. Again, sometimes a bit of a surprise. And again, I think this is all part of the whole thing of reimagining that supply chain, that holistic integrated supply chain. So, I think COVID has certainly shown, and in our industry and in lots of other industries, Adrian, that supply chains today are very long, sometimes very inflexible, and sometimes from a very limited set of suppliers. And now our manufacturers and our customers that we're dealing with on a daily basis are really looking for opportunities to ensure that continuity and flexibility in their supply chain. And also they're looking to make those supply chains more transparent to their customers. So giving that visibility and analytics to their customers to show, this is our supply chain, this is how much inventory we've got on hand. We can meet all of your demand for XYZ product globally, and that's without a doubt becoming a competitive advantage. Certainly when there's government-based tenders, we're seeing that ability to see that visualized supply chain and predictable supply chain, and with you know, the supporting data behind it, it's really being a, you know, it's really giving a distinct advantage to manufacturing suppliers in that space. You know, again, you know, we're seeing that across procurement functions, digital functions, and right across the supply chain.
I think, I mean, it's very interesting, Denis, because I think, you know, sort of some of the themes that are coming out of today, which, you know, might be obvious themes, but are, you know, the more mature you are with your processes, the more professional you are with your manufacturing processes, the more control of your data, the use of technology, you know, the better the single view of the truth about what's happening from the data within your business, the more able you will be to make those flexible, quick, fast decisions that we talked about at the top of this webinar. And you know, within a private equity context, which most of our guests today will be involved with, either as an investor or as a you know, an operator of a private equity backed business, then that is clearly going to drive value. So depending on how far you are down the journey of improving the processes, driving technology, getting a single view of the truth from data, using robotics, automation, all that kind of good stuff, that will have an impact on where you are with your eventual valuation potentially when you come to exit. So it's an interesting sort of journey, I guess, is where we are with that. In terms of sort of moving towards our last question, which I think we're kind of touching on anyway, is how this could all affect your business. I guess there's lots of answers to that, and you know, time is not on our side in this webinar at the moment. But what's the view, Phil and Denis, in terms of, you know, what are the key takeaways? What do we think we should be doing here? You know, what are the 3 or 4 key messages that we can leave people with today, which we think might help them going forward?
Okay, yeah, I'll take that as Phil here. Denis mentioned control tower as a concept that's providing insight into the entire supply chain, which I think he's right, is something that there's a demand, well, will need to be demand for. So improved certainty, enabling diversity within the supply chain, and understanding the interdependencies, de-risk, provide greater predictability. And there's lots of tools around to provide that insight, which will enable your ability to respond, to be more accurate and more flexible around the data you're getting. And that's suppliers, logistics, customers, and distributors. And there's lots of tools already, but they're not quick fixes around artificial intelligence, business intelligence, which can enable you to do root cause analysis, what if scenarios, risk analysis, and response management. So there's lots of things you can do, and I think looking at our slide that's up, we're going to be covering reimagining the workplace as well. So I don't want to necessarily leap to a conclusion, but I think you need to identify what challenges you face in your particular market and your particular business, because one answer doesn't fit all. Your set of challenges will be different, and you've got to find the right questions to ask. What do I need to do with my supply chain? What are the challenges related to that? What does the market need that I'm supplying? What are my own capabilities now, and what do I need to develop in order to be more flexible, rapid, more agile, and to be able to respond to unforeseen challenges in ways that we've not seen before? So that's at the start of the answer, is to understand how it affects you and your business specifically, and how in your market, your supply chain, and how internally your capabilities can be adapted to respond to those challenges.
Okay, let me just ask you, Phil, around the reimagining the workplace. Is this specifically, do you think, around, you know, driving different behaviors with people, or is it reducing people via use of technology, or is it physical limitations on space because of new health and safety regulations, or is it a mix of all of those things, or is it something else, or are those 3 things just too simplistic a way of looking at it?
No, I think it's a mix of all of those, Adrian. For start, we've got to accept machines in manufacturing need people to run and maintain them. And people now and potentially in the future are going to need space. So how many people on site can you get? Is it half? How do you manage the flow of products, materials around your site and the flow of people around it? It'd be very different in different environments. I think I've been to loads of businesses and walked around the shop floor, and some I'll say still, and in some instances I think it's quite, has historically been quite legitimate. We've had a high number of people on the shop floor, a lot of movement, not only the people but of components, with work orders being on sheets of paper which people pass from one to the next, and they tick them off and they move on to the next section. After a few days, the product and the filled out worksheet appears at the end. Now, there's always been good reasons for investing in a bit more insight in terms of being able to understand the work in progress, the utilization, operational efficiency. But I think there's additional drivers now to reimagining the workplace and additional automation, because you're now looking at, well, how do we reduce the need for people to handle things? How do we reduce the need for flow, certain amounts of flow of people and products on site? So how should we be laid out to actually meet those challenges? And and as a consequence, I think it's going to be meeting many of the other drivers behind greater automation of manufacturing anyway. And another area which is related to the workplace is those who actually potentially don't need to be there. With remote working, it's something that is highly relevant now, but a lot of businesses rely on people on site to monitor operations, to monitor the quality and the efficiency and progress and the status of the manufacturing. Yet there are a lot of digital tools that can be provided along with the infrastructure to support that, to enable that to be remote monitoring, for people monitoring and correcting and managing the manufacturing processes remotely, or even just give instructions to the now fewer people who are still present. So there's a range of opportunities there to actually reduce the number of people, to change the workflows. But as I said earlier on, there are also challenges around, well, what are you going to be manufacturing? You fundamentally got to ask what is it you should be manufacturing. Then you've got to look at, well, in what way do we now need to, both from an efficiency point of view, which was always a driver, but in terms of things like health and safety, and different product mixes from the past, and the ability to be more agile.
Okay. And Denis, would you like to just give us your perhaps just a couple of minutes here to summarise your view on the longer term impacts, whether it's around the workplace and so on and so forth? I mean, I know you've offered quite a few views on that already, but specifically anything around the workplace, and if we could wrap that up, I think that we're coming towards the end of our time.
Great, yeah, Adrian, I'll be brief. I think actually, it's a good time to think of, of one particular customer of ours, and just maybe a little bit of a case study in what they're doing and how they're changing. Again, this particular customer is a global leading pharmaceutical company, a household name, and their movement and their changes in manufacturing are relatively sizable. Some of the changes I've already mentioned, but even from the perspective and to follow on from Phil's discussion points there, traditionally manufacturing obviously requires people to be physically on site, operators, maintenance staff, vendors and contractors. But this manufacturer in several of their large global locations, view that they need to move 50% of their on-site personnel off-site. So, they've really adopted this, and they term it the virtual shift, where they're using rapid remote diagnostics and management tools and collaboration tools, such as the tools we've already talked about today with Phil and yourself, and deploying those tools. So, basically having, a lot of our engineering, automation, production specialists off-site, remotely connected, and using technology to guide and support the very much reduced physical on-site presence of staff. So, and that's enabled by real-time data and, the range of communication and collaboration tools that we've talked about. So, this virtual shift is a practical example of the very significant change that we're seeing in across the industry and in this particular company as well. So, from our perspective, that virtual work now is really becoming not just for the office staff, procurement, finance, and IT personnel, HR personnel, but it's becoming a new reality for everyone, Adrian. And it's becoming a reality on the manufacturing shop floor for this leading household name. Again, I think it'll fundamentally change manufacturing and how the work environment in manufacturing operates and evolves.
Thank you, Denis. Well, look, guys, I think this has been a very informative discussion. So we've covered a lot of areas. I'd like to thank you for your time, and also everyone else who is listening in. Thank you for joining us. Denis, Phil, thank you. If anybody would like any further information, then please, by all means, reach out to us at intuitusadvisory.com or on the email that's on your screen now. But I'd like just to reiterate, thank you, everybody, for joining, and thanks for your time today.